Me on your program. And actually, let me go ahead and share my screen so that we can jump into the presentation. All right. Can you all see my screen? Okay, I believe you should be able to see my screen. Fantastic. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So again, welcome. My name is Ade Bakare, and just like you heard in the introduction, so I'm currently based in the United States, Bowie, Maryland, to be specific. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some of the best practices for designing effective learning solutions. These are things that I've picked up over my 12 years of being in the corporate learning and development space. So just to share with you just a little bit about myself. So I currently work as a corporate instructional designer and e-learning developer. Like I said, I have a total of about 12 years of experience in corporate learning and development. My entire career has been spent within the biotechnology or biopharmaceutical industry. So a lot of the companies that I've worked for are within that industry. So in my role, I'm responsible for, not only instructional design, but I also do training facilitation, implementation of learning management systems as well. I'm a certified professional in talent development. Some of you might know about this organization called ATD. It's a very popular global organization based in the US. That offers this certification. So if you guys are interested, you can certainly check that out as well. So these are just a few of the companies that I've had the privilege of working with. As you can see, if you're familiar with these organizations, then you will know that these are all within the biotech industry. But today, really what I just want to cover with you guys, like I said, is, what are some of those key elements that instructional designers need to consider whenever we're developing a training program. And so today we're going to be talking about these key elements. We're going to be talking about, the importance of writing clear learning outcomes and objectives, because of course that is very, very important that's actually the key cornerstone of instructional design. So we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to talk about, instructional strategies or instructional methods. What are those? Why are they important when it comes to designing learning solutions? And we'll talk about how we can sequence, structure, and outline the courses in such a way that makes sense. And also, how can you document all of this, design effort, right? So we're going to look at all of that. So these are the things that we're going to be discussing today. Now, before we actually jump into design, there are some things that you need to consider, right? So prior to designing your course, there are certain things that needs to happen first, right? You want to make sure that you have first conducted a thorough training needs analysis. This is very important, right? Because your training needs analysis helps you to assess the gaps that exist between, desired performance and the current performance within an organization or amongst a specific group of individuals. So this is very, very important. If you're familiar with instructional design frameworks or instructional design processes, then you're probably familiar with the Ade model. And of course, that model starts with an analysis, right? So even though today's presentation is going to be based solely around what happens in design and the considerations that instructional designers need to have in that design phase, it's very important to make sure that before you even get to the design phase, that you have first conducted a thorough training needs analysis, because that would help you to identify those knowledge, skills, and competencies that need to be developed through training or some other learning intervention. Right. So the output of your training needs analysis usually includes a comprehensive report that outlines the identified training needs and recommendations for addressing them. Okay. So once you've done that, of course, and you've identified the gaps that exist, then you can, of course, move into your design phase. Now, the design phase is primarily about working with your subject matter experts and stakeholders to basically to create a detailed plan for how the learners will experience the training, right? So you're not necessarily developing any materials at this stage. At this stage, you're really just putting a lot of thought into, what are some of the, what are the learning objectives? What are the activities that we're going to need to do in this training? How are we going to assess whether or not someone is actually mastering or learning something in this training? So you're thinking about all of those things, okay? So that's really what your design phase entails. It basically sets you up for a smooth development when you get to the point of developing the instructional materials, all right? So that's in a nutshell what your design phase entails. But like I said, this presentation is more about what happens here. What are some of the things that you need to think about when you are in this phase, okay? So let's kick off with just a little case study, right? Let's say there's this company ABC, right? We're going to call it company ABC, right? And so company ABC has this business challenge, right? So the business challenge is basically they're experiencing declining customer retention rates due to poor customer service experience. Okay, so that's the business challenge. And say maybe the senior leaders of this organization have reached out to the learning and development organization to say, hey, we need your help in seeing what's happening here. Why are we experiencing declining customer retention rates? Why are we having poor customer service? Why are our customers experiencing poor customer service? So let's say you conducted training needs analysis, right? And you conducted a very thorough training needs analysis. You gathered data. You interviewed people, and basically you reviewed reports and so on and so forth, right? You did everything that needs to be done in a training needs analysis, and you identified and made recommendations for learning solutions as well as non-learning solutions. Obviously, your non-learning solutions would address things that have nothing to do with a lack of knowledge and skills, right? But those but whenever you identify a gap in people's knowledge and skills, then the learning solutions, of course, can address those. All right, and that's really why training needs analysis is important, because it helps you to answer the question: is training the answer? Do we even, is training what we need, basically, right? And a lot of times, training is usually part of the solution, right? It's not the only solution, it's usually part of the solution. So let's say, this company, the instructional designers, they conducted a training needs analysis and they recommended this learning solution to develop an advanced customer service skills training. All right. So let's just say that's what they came up with. So how do we go about designing this course? Okay. So let's see what that entails. The very first thing that we need to do is we need to clearly state the outcomes and objectives. All right. And I'll talk about the difference between the two because they're not the same. So what do we mean by learning outcomes? So your learning outcomes are usually those overarching and broad statements that describe the desired result of the training program or the learning experience, right? So this is really what we want the training to help the business to achieve, right? So they're usually very high level. They provide a big picture view of what the training will help the business to achieve, all right? Examples would include, to increase customer satisfaction ratings, as in the case of company ABC, or to maybe improve communication, or to increase employee engagement, or reduce errors, right? So you get the idea. But really, learning outcomes, they focus on the end result, right? And that is, again, what the training aims to help the business to achieve. Now, once you've identified this and you've clearly stated this, then you can move on to your learning objectives. But before we go into learning objectives, let's go back to company ABC, right? So we understand the business challenge that the company was facing. Like we said, we've conducted a thorough needs analysis, right? So back to company ABC. The project name is, advanced customer service skills training in this case, right? The target audience is customer service representative. These are things that you would have clearly defined in your analysis phase, right? And then the learning outcome in this case would be to achieve a targeted increase in customer satisfaction ratings by enhancing customer service skills, right? So it's very clear what we are, what the learning outcomes are, right? Or what the learning outcome is in this case. So really, by the end of the training program, customer service representatives that go through this training program, they should be able to effectively apply these advanced customer service skills to achieve this targeted increase in customer satisfaction ratings, right? So that is what the learning outcomes would look like. Now, if we now move forward and talk about learning objectives, your learning objectives are more specific and measurable statements. They outline the specific actions, behaviors, or tasks that the learner need to demonstrate in order to achieve the desired learning outcomes. All right. So this speaks specifically to what are the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors that the learners would need to acquire in order to be able to, achieve those desired learning outcomes. Right. That's what your learning objectives are. Right. So they're more focused around the learner. They're more focused around the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors that the learner will acquire. And by acquiring those and demonstrating those skills, the expectation is that they will be able to achieve those desired learning outcomes that we previously stated, right? So what does this, so if we move on, it's important to know that there are generally two types of learning objectives. So you have your terminal objectives and you have enabling objectives. Your terminal objectives are the most, or kind of like, you can call them the main objectives. All right. These are things that the learner must master before they complete the course, right? Your enabling objectives, on the other hand, they enable the learner to master the terminal objectives. All right. So in other words, to master one main objective, learners usually have to master several subordinate objectives, and these are known as your supporting or enabling objectives, right? Now, your enabling objectives also support the terminal objectives by breaking them down into, into more manageable chunks, okay? So that's really the difference between the two. Now, let's go back to our case study example and kind of see how this plays out, right? So if you've been following, we started from a business challenge. We said we've conducted a training needs analysis, right? And then we've kind of taken it further to begin to design an advanced customer service skills training, right? And we've identified and clearly stated our learning outcome. And from that, we've defined these terminal objectives, okay? Now, again, unless you are like the subject matter expert on the course that you're developing or designing, a lot of times instructional designers, as an instructional designer, you have to work with subject matter experts to define all of these things, right? So let's say you've worked with, SMEs within company ABC, and you guys have, identified these terminal objectives, and we would list them out as this, right? It's important to make sure that when you're writing objectives, of course, we're using action words. I don't like when I see by the end of this course, the learner will know or the learner will be able to understand. I try to stay away from those words because you really can't measure those, right? So always try to stick with action verbs, action words. So like in this case, they will be able to explain the importance of customer satisfaction. They will be able to identify, they'll be able to develop, and so on and so forth, right? Also, I would recommend that you check out Bloom's taxonomy and maybe learn a little bit more about how you can use that to help you in writing effective learning objectives as well, okay? So for your enabling objectives, it would look something like this, right? So if we say maybe we take one of these objectives, right, and we kind of break it further, we would get our enabling objectives, okay? But I'll talk a little bit more later on as to how we get here to your enabling objectives, okay? So that's really the first thing that we need to kind of, get sorted. The learning outcomes and the learning objectives. So once we've clearly defined those, then the next thing that we need to do is we need to decide on delivery methods, right? So how is this course going to be delivered, right? Is it going to be a self-paced course, which self-paced, of course, is usually referred to as your asynchronous courses, whereas your live instructor-led courses are known as your synchronous courses, simply because you, the learner, and the instructor, you are, the training is happening live, basically, right? So how is the training going to be delivered, right? So is it self-paced? Is it instructor-led, in person? Is it going to be a live virtual training, or is it going to be a blend of self-paced and instructor-led? Or is it going to be an on-the-job training? So these are things that we need to kind of think about. And again, in this design phase, we're really just making decisions as to how the learner will experience the training. We haven't really started creating anything yet. We're just making these decisions, right? So for our advanced customer service skills training, so let's say we decided to go with an instructor-led in-person training. There are a few factors that would come into play when you're deciding on the best delivery method, and a lot of things to consider there. So, for example, you might consider the geographical location of the audience, right? So, if you work for a global organization, and people that have to take this training are kind of scattered around the world, right? Maybe a self-paced training might be better, right? So you really have to think about the specific situation that you're in and make the best judgment as to, okay, what will be the best way, or which approach would be the best for this particular training. All right. So let's just say for our company ABC, we figured that the best delivery method is an instructor-led or in-person training. Okay, so let's say that's the best approach. So we're going to go with that, right? So moving on, the next thing that we then need to think about is we need to think about how are we going to structure, sequence, and outline this course? How are we going to lay it out, right? This is very important because a well-sequenced content is important to the success of a training program because the content will be easier for the learners to follow. The content, if it's well sequenced, it would also ensure a logical flow from one point to the next. And it also allows for logical transitions from one chunk of information to the next. Okay. So this is why it's very important to really work with your SMEs to think about how are we going to lay out this course, right? And there are a few things that would influence how this works as well. So as you collaborate and you work with your SMEs, obviously the first thing you want to do is you want to identify what are all of the topics that we need to cover in this training, right? Information from your training needs analysis as well would help in this when you get to this point, because you may have discovered certain specific issues that need to be addressed in the training, right? So you're going to bring all of that here as well, right? So, so in working with your SMEs, you need to identify what are all of those topics, and then you want to identify the best approach to sequencing the content. For some courses, it's best to sequence the topics in the order of how the job actually, flows. So you can sequence it in job performance order, or maybe chronologically by tasks, or maybe just by topic, right? If there is no specific step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that kind of thing, right? Or you might decide to go from the simplest, topics to the most complex topics, right? So think about and work with your SMEs to determine the best way to organize and to sequence the topic. And then, of course, once you've done that, you want to organize the topics into modules and lessons, right? So this is where expert knowledge comes in, right? So your SMEs will help you to figure out, okay, what are the modules going to be like? What are the lessons going to be like? And so on and so forth, okay? Let's quickly jump back to company ABC. So let's say we've done the work with our SMEs, right? Work with the SMEs to figure out, okay, these are the modules and the lessons that we find are important. And you can basically just lay them out like this, right? So identify what's our main module 1 going to be about, what are the lessons we're going to cover under that, and so on and so forth, right? So course sequence, structure, and outline is very, very important as well. So let's say we're done with that, right? We've been able to successfully get through that, right? The next thing we need to think about is instructional methods or strategies. What do we mean when we say instructional methods or strategies? These are basically techniques or activities that designers use to link objectives to the learners, okay? The way that I always like to describe it is this way. Your learning objectives set the destination. That's where you want to get the learners to, right? Your everything that we've been talking about so far, so you're sequencing the course in the right order. Now we're talking about instructional methods or strategies. These things are vehicles that would help the learner to get to that destination, right? So, but instructional methods or instructional strategies, you can call them activities, you can call them techniques, you can call them methods, but they're basically things that you're going to have the learner engage in order to get them to meet the learning objectives, right? So some examples would include case studies, right? Case studies are great. Role plays, right? Group discussions, lecture. You might, obviously your entire training program you would not want that to be lecture, but there might be times where it's just you sharing information with them, right? So you usually want to mix these up, right? Hands-on demonstration with practice as well. These are just a few examples. These examples listed here, these are common for instructor-led courses or instructor-led training programs, right? So as you can imagine, as the delivery method changes, your instructional methods or strategies would have to change as well, right? So the way that, so the instructional strategies or methods that you would use for a self-paced online course would be different from those that you would use in a live in-person instructor-led training, right? So you want to think about those things. So let's look at for a live virtual instructor-led training, right? So you might still use case studies, right? Because those would be very relevant, right? And again, in using case studies, you allow the participants to analyze, real world scenarios or case studies or cases related to the course topic, right? If it's live virtual, you might engage them in interactive discussions, right? So this can be facilitated group discussions that allow participants to share their ideas, ask questions, engage in collaborative problem solving. And this can be done through chat, audio, or video, right? Group activities, so you can have, breakout sessions, right, in the virtual environment, breakout rooms, you might have them, again, get together, discuss these issues. Polls and surveys, so you can kind of see polls and surveys for live virtual instructor-led courses. They're very common, right? So that might be another strategy that you might incorporate into your training. But you make those decisions. So again, we're designing the course, so we're thinking about all of these things and we're planning it, right? So do we bring in gamification elements, right, into the live virtual environment to make it even more interesting and more engaging for the learner, to drive home the point and help them meet the learning objectives? Kahoot, Mentimeter, these are really good platforms that you can use. Whiteboarding and collaboration as well. So a lot of virtual environments, Zoom, Teams, they all have these collaborative functions that you can use. So, but again, you have to think about these strategies. So these are just a few examples for your live virtual instructor-led. What about for self-paced online? So if we decided that the course is a self-paced online course, right? What strategies would we use here? So we might say, okay, well, video lessons, interactive multimedia, self-paced e-learnings. A lot of them are usually developed in e-learning authoring software like Storyline, Captivate. So, can we leverage those tools to make, the training engaging and to, help the learners meet the objectives, right? Can we personalize the training? And so that goes into personalized learning paths. Again, gamification elements. We can still use case studies here, branching scenarios, and so on. So depending on your delivery method, again, that would kind of determine, what strategies you use, right? But it's important to think about the strategy that you're going to use, right? So again, let's go back to company ABC. Remember, this is a live in-person instructor-led training. So let's just say we decided that the best methods or the best strategies that we're going to use in this case would be case studies, group discussions, role plays, and of course, lecture, right? So these are the instructional methods that we've selected for company ABC's training program, right? So, and then once you've decided that, and of course, we're going to move on to the next one, which is instructional materials. So here you want to decide what are the instructional materials that we would need to create, right? Here are a few examples, and there are probably a lot more that we can add to this list, but these are just a few common examples. So presentation slides, right? Of course, for your instructor-led, you usually would have to create slides. So again, at this point, we're just deciding what materials do we need to develop, right? We're not actually developing them yet. We're just deciding, okay, what are we going to need? So we're going to need presentation slide. We're going to maybe need to create some handouts, maybe some guides for the facilitators and for the participants, maybe workbooks, job aids. We might need to create multimedia resources, like maybe create a video or something to explain some part of the training. Or maybe we just need to create, an e-learning module, right? So we decide what instructional materials we have to create at this point. All right. So again, going back to company ABC, because it's an instructor-led training, we decided that these are the instructional materials that we definitely would need to develop. So we're going to need to create these presentation slides, handouts, job aids. The handouts, we might give a description of the case study or maybe a specific problem that the learners have to work through, right? So we've decided that these are the things that we need to create once we start developing, right? Good. Next thing, of course, is assessment and evaluation. How are we going to assess the learner? So at a very high level, we're thinking about how do we assess learners in this course, right? Of course, these are a few examples of some ways in which we can assess their knowledge. And so when I talk about assessment here, if you're familiar with the Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation, this is a level 2 evaluation, right? Because it's happening in the training while the training is going on, right? So we're checking their knowledge, we're quizzing them. Basically, we're just trying to verify whether or not learning is taking place as the training progresses. So these are just a few ways in which we can do that. Okay. All right. So going back to our case study with company ABC. So let's say we decided our assessment and evaluation would be, we'll give them knowledge checks throughout as we progress in the class, in the live in-person training, right? But maybe at the end of the training, we might administer a quiz via our learning management system, right? So we might say, okay, you know what, before you can get credit for this training or for this class, you have to successfully complete this quiz. Or maybe we give them an assignment, say, okay, this is a problem that you need to solve, and report back after XYZ days in order for you to get credit for this training. Okay, so those are just some ways in which we can evaluate and assess the learners in this case. Okay, all right. So having done that, then the next thing, of course, is we need to actually plan the course content itself, right? So if you remember, we spent some time to create a sequence of topics. So we have the modules, we have the lessons, and if you guys remember, we have a course outline now, right? We need to take it a step further and really dive deep into the topics, into the lessons, right? So by that, I mean, for each topic that we've identified, we need to now go a little bit deeper and think about, okay, what are the teaching points for each lesson? Okay. Again, this is where your subject matter expert's knowledge is going to come in, right? This is where they need to, bring their expertise to say, okay, for topic 1, these are the important teaching points, and these are the things we want to make sure we cover for lesson 1, and so on for lesson 2, and so on and so forth, right? So we need to do that. And of course, also for each, we need to decide, okay, what would be the instructional method, or what activity can we engage the learner in to drive home this point, right? Or is there even a need for maybe any specific activity? Because some lessons you might just give the information and then maybe you move on from there. But for some, you have to think about what sort of activity or what sort of instructional strategy can we engage them in to drive home the point, or to help them to understand the topic better. Okay. And then you want to think about, okay, the content format. How do we present this piece of content or this topic? How do we present it to them? How long is it going to take? How do we assess them? Okay. So what will that look like for our example? It would look something like this, right? So maybe for module 1, this is Introduction to Customer Service Excellence, right? Our enabling objectives that we kind of talked about before, right? We would list them here, right? So by the end of this module, what are we trying to get the learners to accomplish by the end of this module? What should they be able to do, right? And so we kind of just identify and list those here, and then we can go into each lesson topic, right? So let's say, we're going to do a welcome and introduction, right? And say maybe during that introduction, we play a video. Maybe we decided we're going to play a video from the CEO welcoming everyone to the training, talking about the importance of the training that they're about to sit through, right? So that's a video that we're deciding here that, okay, needs to be created. So if we all agree that, yes, a video would be a great idea, then we'll put that down. Maybe we'll create a script for it, and maybe we say it's a 3-minute video, right? The objectives. This is where we'll state the objectives. And then for your lesson 1, right, how are we going to present that information? Of course, we have a slide already for it. The instructor will present the slide. You might include teaching points here for your first lesson. How long is that going to take? And so maybe for lesson 2, we say, okay, this lesson is on customer loyalty and retention. So maybe we create a video demonstrating the impact of customer loyalty on the business, right? So this is a video that we're going to maybe create. We're going to have them watch the video. And at the end of the video, we're going to maybe give them time to reflect on what they just watched and have a group discussion about it, right? You're making these decisions at this point about how they will experience this module 1. And then any assessments or maybe quizzes or questions that you might want to ask at the end of the module, you might list them here. All right. So, and of course, the same format, you would take the same approach when you get to module 2, module 3, module 4, and so on and so forth, right? So hopefully all of this is making sense so far. All right. So as I begin to wrap up, it's important to think about next steps, right? So you've gotten to this point, right? What are some important next steps for you as the designer? Once you've put all of that together, make sure you obtain stakeholder approval, right? Get stakeholder sign off on your plan, right? Obviously, it's always a great idea to keep them in the loop as you've been kind of progressing through all of this. And then complete an instructional design document. So you probably would notice that, you know, these have everything that I've been showing you in the case study. These have kind of been snapshots of maybe sections of a document, right? Well, yes, you're right. It's an instructional design document that helps you to collate all of that information. So it basically helps you to plan. Why is that important? It's so important so that when you get to your development phase, you have a well thought out plan, design plan, and you can basically take that into development. You know what needs to be created, and you just begin to develop and create the materials, right? So, so that's very important. Let me quickly show you an example of what that looks like. So, oops, let me see if I can pull that up here. All right. Okay. So this is an instructional design document. I highly would recommend that you take the time to create something like this. I mean, it really just helps to make the planning of your course design a lot easier and smoother. If you guys want me to send this to you, I can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can certainly send it to you. So you can make use of it. But something like this, again, can really make life a lot easier for you. Okay. So yeah, and really that's all I wanted to share with you guys. I think you know, if you take these steps, once you get to development, it's going to really make your development smoother. You know exactly what needs to be created. Okay. All right. So thank you guys so much. Again, you know, you guys can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I run these corporate instructional design mastery institute where I teach instructional design, talk about training needs analysis, effective course design. I even talk about authoring tools as well. So if you guys are interested, you can certainly check out the website. And if you have any questions about any of the offerings, certainly reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Okay. So that's really my time. Thank you guys for, I know that was kind of really quick. I had to blast through that because, again, I have to get somewhere in a few minutes, but please let me know if you have any questions at all. Okay.